Day one, executive orders are signed by Governor Spanberger the day that she's sworn into office. And the General Assembly passed 4 constitutional amendments that will help to change the landscape of politics here in the Commonwealth. What does this mean for you, your community, your city, and yes, the Commonwealth of Virginia? It's Stay the Water. I'm your host, Eric Claville, and we want to thank you for joining us for our 2026 General Assembly series. We're broadcasting, as we always do, from the campus of the Norfolk State University, home of the Spartan Nation, from none other than WNSB Hot 91, the soul of VA. For those of you that have been joining us for this series, it's the beginning of the year here in the Commonwealth, and that means that the legislature, the oldest legislative body, is in session. And we are excited for what's happening, and of course, with the new executive office of the governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general, and yes, the supermajority, the mandate by the Democrats in the House of Delegates and a majority in the Senate. So one thing about it is that they have wasted no time flexing their majority power, and the governor's wasted no time either ensuring that her executive orders are given to her agencies in order to execute their agenda. So this show, we're going to take a look at these executive orders. We're going to go in depth. There were 10 that were signed on the first day. And then we're also going to take a look at the constitutional amendments that were passed by both the House of Delegates and the Senate on last week as well. Now, these are very important because what this does, it sets the tone or the roadmap for this upcoming General Assembly and, for the most part, for this entire administration of our governor. Now, you know, here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, our governor cannot run for consecutive terms. So, of course, this is an idea that was created to get away from an individual having rule for a long time, a monarchy, if you would. And it gives an opportunity for fresh ideas and to come into the office. 4 years is a long time. Some say 8 years is better. We may need to revisit that. But for the Commonwealth, it's been working. But also, we also see a major shift in the politics here in the Commonwealth. The majority of citizens in the Commonwealth want Democrats to basically govern in the General Assembly. And they showed that by coming out and voting for what we're calling a supermajority, 64-36. New members were sworn in as members that were in one house, moved up to the next, or they were in one house and moved up into the governor's administration. So there's a lot of moving parts that's taking place in these first week and a half, if you think about it, of the General Assembly. But exciting it is. And let me tell you, as we're there on the Hill and watching it in action, it is absolutely amazing to see how everything is coming together. So with that, first, what I want to do, I want us to look at what executive orders are. We hear it all the time. From the White House, of course, we hear, the president has signed an executive order, this and that, or our governor has signed executive orders. But what exactly are they? We know from, of course, that a bill is created, and we know that Congress has the power to create law, right? Of course, the Supreme Court has the power to review law, and of course, they make law by default because they rule on various cases that become precedent. But the governor, or as we say, the executive office, has the power to make law as well, and it's through executive orders. So under Virginia's law, Virginia's governor uses executive orders to direct state agencies, implement policy, and manage government operations. Now, the functionings as directives with the force of law for the executive branch, often focusing on key areas like cost of living, education, and they can also be used to streamline processes or change existing policies. But they remain subject to judicial review and can be altered by future governors. So these executive orders, they are issued by the sitting governor. So that means that now former Governor Youngkin, he issued executive orders, and his predecessor before him, former Governor Northam, former Governor McAuliffe, and former Governor Bob McDonnell, and so forth, so on. And these individuals created this law of these directives to these agencies. Now, governors can come back and change them, right? And they could also be altered or changed by their predecessor, or those governors that are coming after them, actually. So what ends up happening is that now we find Governor Spanberger. She signed her first 10. Now she signed her on her first day, and more are coming. And these executive orders, they still have the force of law, but they also have they're able to be reviewed by the judiciary, which means it's just not, the law and that's it. That means it's the law until there's a challenge by judicial review, and the courts are able to change that. So with that, once again, they can apply to state agencies. The governor can use them really to start their term or on key issues and initiate actions. They can impact or streamline regulations, create task force, change policies, or it can also set technological standards. And once again, these orders are used fairly quickly to set the agenda or the direct landscape which the governor is coming in on their platform. And we saw that here in the Commonwealth when definitely Governor Youngkin came in and signed his day one executive orders, and now Governor Spanberger signing hers. So what are these executive orders and how do they impact us? So there were 10 executive orders that were signed on day one. And the 10, according to the governor's website, are Executive Order 1 is focused on affordability. Executive Order 2, healthcare costs. Executive Order 3, housing. Executive Order 4, public education. Executive Order number 5, economic resiliency task force. Executive Order number 6, board of visitor appointments. Executive Order 7, emergency powers delegation. Executive Order number 8, chief of staff responsibilities. Executive Order number 9, equal opportunity. And number 10, rescinding Youngkin Executive Order number 47. Now, once again, as we said, the governor coming after can change the executive orders by the governor before them. So we saw Executive Order 10 do just that. It just didn't change it. It actually rescinded it. So what are these executive orders? According to VPM, after these executive orders were signed, it was an action that delegates broad emergency and day-to-day authority to Governor Spanberger's long-term chief of staff. And she did this hours after taking office. Now, of course, when we take a look at what these executive orders are, they're right in line with the governor's platform that she ran on and the press conference she had when she was governor-elect. So according to VPN, Spanberger, who is also the first woman to be elected governor here in the Commonwealth, she didn't take questions during her press conference, but we can read exactly what they are. So with this, the directives on affordability, number 1, Executive Order 1, were to identify cost savings for families, which state facilitated services are more at risk due to federal policies, and also finding housing regulations that may be cut in order to spur new home and apartment construction. As it relates to the executive order named under housing, health, care, energy, education, childcare, and living expenses like groceries as areas of particular concern. Also, healthcare and identifying potential ways to loosen housing regulations got their own executive orders. Now, in addition to that, Governor Spanberger, in the order on healthcare funding, she created what's called the Interagency Health Financing Task Force. Now, once again, these executive orders can create these task force for primarily studies. And this was created to coordinate healthcare financing and sort out all the various funding risks posed by the congressional passage of H.R. 1. Now, this was the hundreds of thousands of Virginians who are at risk of losing their health care are being priced out due to the bill's provisions. Let me talk about that executive order just for a moment. What is H.R. 1? H.R. 1 is the budget bill, or the big beautiful bill, that was passed by Congress at the behest of the president. That means that it was over $1 trillion that was taken out for Medicaid expansion, right, under the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, and given for tax cuts under President Donald Trump's big, beautiful bill. There was also $300,000 cut from other programs like food in order to help pay for these tax cuts as well. So once again, if you take a look at these two administrations, take a look at these two parties. One party is focused on tax cuts for the wealthy. Another party is focused on affordable health care and food for those that can't afford it. So again, you do the math on that and see where that gets you, right? So with that being the case, we find that there are a lot of issues that we're going to have because of the monies that are pulled out from the tax cuts from H.R. 1. So H.R. 1 is a congressional bill that was passed by the House of Congress, under this Republican Congress, known as the Big Beautiful Bill. Now, that order also includes a review of managed care organizations, according to VPM. Now, this is a key part of Medicaid services here in the Commonwealth. Why is that? Because recently, a forecast from the Department of Medical Assistance Services said that managed care organizations would need an additional, catch this, $3.2 billion in state funds to maintain current services for 1.6 million Virginians enrolled, according to December data. So once again, because of these cuts, because of the money that was pulled out to pay for tax cuts, that means these managed care organizations, which are a part of Medicaid helps those that don't of lower means afford health care. Because of that, they're going to need $3.2 billion more in state funds just to help 1.6 million of our over 8 million citizens here in the Commonwealth. Think about that for a moment. $3.2 billion. So that means, do we pull it all out or of our reserves? Do we borrow it? Do we raise taxes? How do we do that? Because the Big Beautiful Bill took it away. So that has to be figured out. Or do we make tough choices or a combination of them all? Now, some of the underlying challenges, according to VPM, for Spanberger and for Virginia, tight spending plan, given rising education and healthcare costs, they compound the limitations of state government. Now, this is according to the director for George Mason's Center for Regional Analysis, Terry Clower. Terry said this. He said, saying that we're going to make affordability better for you in the short run is really hard. Why? For government to do, and particularly state governments. And again, that is because they've seen a trend. He said, we've also seen a trend now for professional business service jobs that are declining. The effects are crossing different levels of households. So you're creating some pressure in the economy when you look at it. Now, during the press conference, well, let's look at this. What Virginia normally does. Virginia normally conforms to federal tax law on what's called a rolling basis with exceptions. However, when we take a look at what's happening now, state lawmakers paused that conformity in 2025 in light of the federal cuts to taxes that could have a trickle-down effect on Virginia's tax collection to the tune of, guess what, billions of dollars. So we just don't have it because of what's taking place on the federal level. So Democrats said during the opening General Assembly that they would not look to conform to many of the new federal tax provisions. Now, also, in addition to that, Governor Spanberger directed Virginia agencies to identify the risks that the federal government's policies will have in one order. And also, Clower noted that tariffs have an inflationary effect. Immigration crackdowns also could affect labor costs, and availability and jobs connected to the federal government are also affected. So when we talk about affordability, we have to first look at what was created, self-imposed on the federal level under this particular Congress and this White House, and how it impacts Virginia. Because as I say, as Virginia goes, so goes the rest of the country. So we've got the flu right now, and the rest of the country, they're catching it. So again, if you want to look at the impact of what's happening now, H.R. 1, the Big Beautiful Bill, you're going to start to see it in the Commonwealth starting now. But in addition to that, another executive order, number 6, higher education governance, they got a lot of special attention to. You got to remember the UVA, University of Virginia, board appointments and back and forth between Governor Youngkin and now Governor Spanberger and now Governor Spanberger. So, and of course, the legislature calling UVA to testify before a committee to find out what happened. So, what Executive Order 6 does, it requires recommendations for legislative or policy changes to how Board of Visitor members are appointed or selected. Now, once again, this wording, she cited federal interference as the need for changes. Quote, "These pressures underscore the urgent need for the Commonwealth to reevaluate how governing boards are appointed, ensuring they are composed of individuals dedicated to uphold the quality, independence, and reputation of our institutions." So VPM also noted that this is but one of the few departures from the approach of Youngkin's administration to university governance. So once again, this was the impact of what's happening on the federal level with the pressure coming from the White House and over DEI on universities and targeted UVA, more specifically in flagship universities across the country in various states, and then also Governor Youngkin as well. Because once again, his executive orders, the president's executive orders, come from the same think tank. So they're one and the same. In addition to that, the Governor Spanberger Executive Order number 4 gives specific mention to diversity and opportunity, right? And it also mentions inclusive education and closing opportunity gaps, while Executive Order 9 tells agencies to take affirmative measures to emphasize the recruitment of qualified minorities, women, disabled persons, and older Virginians to serve at all levels of state government. Now, for me, I've always said the word in front of qualified and of minorities or people of color and women and so forth. I think that adds to the miseducation that individuals who are of color that are hired have to be vetted harder to be qualified, and those who are not of color, those who are white, automatically be deemed to be qualified because you never see in front of qualified applicants or qualified non-minorities or qualified whites. So again, just the wording, something that I've always spoke about for decades, where that needs to be changed. But again, we know the spirit of this executive order because we definitely knew the spirit of the last one. But it also, keep in mind that this executive order under diversity, equity, inclusion, it heavily contrasts with the tone of Youngkin's administration, which praised the closure of DEI offices. Now, in 2023, Martin D. Brown, African-American, Youngkin's chief diversity officer at that time, whose title did not include the word equity, he declared at Virginia Military Institute, VMI, during a talk, he said, quote, "DEI is dead." Well, Spanberger also is rescinding a controversial executive order of Youngkin's that directed state and local law enforcement to pursue immigration-related enforcement duties. Executive Order 10 does not withdraw from existing agreements. However, it just solely rescinds this one provision. It rescinds Youngkin's issued mandate, which directed Virginia's law enforcement agencies to become federally deputized for immigration enforcement and open up departments of correction facilities for immigrants, federal processing, and detention. So once again, that order was in line with what's happening out of Washington, and this is a retraction from that. And finally, Governor Spanberger issued and outlined expanded powers for her chief of staff, who also served as her chief of staff while she was in Congress. And basically, it designated powers which include budgetary and administrative roles, also a limited ability to call forth the National Guard or to declare a state of emergency if the governor is unavailable to be reached. So once again, executive orders, the power of the executive in the seat, chief executive officer, the governor or the president, in this case, Governor Spanberger, to execute and give a direction to their agencies, change policy, and lay the roadmap for their upcoming administration. It's Stay the Water. I'm your host, Eric LaVille, and you're joining us for our 2026 General Assembly series. Today, we're discussing executive orders by Governor Spanberger and constitutional amendments by the legislature. We've just discussed what these executive orders are, these 10, and what they mean, and how they're turning back provisions from the Youngkin administration, but also laying a path forward for the Spanberger platform of affordability and helping to counter and the actions self-imposed hurt by the federal government as relates to affordability from the president's actions of DOGE and the big, beautiful bill, H.R. 1. But now it's time to look at the General Assembly. The General Assembly is also taking action day one. On last week, the General Assembly advanced 4 constitutional amendments on opening day 2026 session. Now, according to Virginia Mercury, the most contentious proposal would allow for mid-decade redrawing of congressional districts, and they went to the Senate and were also passed as well. Now, when we talk about these constitutional amendments, there are some, according to Virginia law, provisions where the legislature have to vote consecutively in consecutive years for a measure and then give it to the people to vote on it in a regular election. So these 3 of these 4 constitutional amendments will be voted on by the people on November 4th. I believe that's the date. I'll double check that, but in our November midterm election. Now, one of them will be voted on in a special election, and that is the redrawing of the congressional lines. I'm calling this part of the redistricting arms race because what is happening is that across the country, at the behest of the president, we are now in a race by states to bring balance back to Congress because the president wanted to push some states to redraw their lines mid-decade, off cycle for congressional lines in order to try to buff it against the Republicans losing power and seats in the midterm election. Now, what does that mean? Redistricting works, let's look at it this way. I'll talk about this a little bit more, but I want to go into these constitutional amendments and then we'll go back to redistricting because we're going to spend a little time on the redistricting because it's very, very important as it relates to what is happening in our country and power. So according Virginia's General Assembly, they passed the 4 amendments, and what they did, it was protection of abortion rights, automatically restoring voting rights for felons, banning same-sex marriage, and allowing mid-decade redistricting, which, again, they will go forth in 2026. Now, these measures were pushed by Democrats after gaining majorities, really aimed to codify key rights and alter redistricting processes. So when we take a look, according to Virginia Mercury, the reproductive rights just basically establishes a right to make decisions about pregnancy. It'll be in the Constitution if the voters vote on it. The voting rights, automatically restoring voting rights to formerly incarcerated individuals after they complete their sentences. Now, right now, this is something that is made arbitrary by Governor Youngkin, where it's viewed one by one in order to give them their right to vote back. Under Governor Northam and Governor McCullough, once a person finished their sentence, then they receive their rights back. It was signed, no problem at all. But what is happening now is that it's taking it out of the hands of one person or the ideology of one administration and putting it in a process where it just happens, right? So if you're incarcerated, if you're convicted and you serve time, once you're released and you serve your debt to society, then your rights to vote are restored. Once you're incarcerated, you don't have your rights to vote, like other rights that you don't have, right, of freedom and the like. Virginia has some of the most convoluted and hardest laws to get your right to vote back after you have been convicted of a felony. And this is problematic. So what this does, this allows our citizens who have served their debt to society, served out their sentence that was given down to them by the courts, and trying to go back into society to be productive. It allows them to have their voting rights back. That's it. In addition to that, you look at marriage equality. It removes the state's defunct ban on same-sex marriage. Now, the interesting thing about this amendment, this is what happens. So right now, same-sex couples do have the right to marry here in the Commonwealth based upon the constitutional case. However, there is a language that bans it within our law, our statute. So it just simply removes that. Now, when the House and Senate approved it, the voting referendum, it requires amendments to pass 2 sessions, which it did. And what's happening now is that now it goes for a constitutional vote. Constitutional vote is based is going to be based in November, as I said before, for three of those. Now, what is that one where it doesn't allow for it in November, but in April? That is redistricting. It grants the legislature the authority to redraw congressional maps mid-decade. Now, you say to yourself, once again, why is this? This is very important because what is happening is that some states are redrawing districts now. Texas, more specifically, Indiana pushed back against it. Missouri redrew a district and drew out a legislative Black Caucus member. Texas did the same thing and drew out a legislative Black Caucus member. And again, these policies are meant to hurt and harm minority districts or Black districts primarily, and then add to and dilute the representation in Congress of those communities and add to the Republican side. That's all it is, to keep numbers. In other words, if you can't win under the rules that are given, change the rules. And that's exactly what they are doing in these other states. But what this does, this amendment, under this proposal, lawmakers can act very narrowly. So in Virginia, instead of redrawing the lines permanently, they're saying if lawmakers could act if another state redraws its congressional map mid-decade for reasons other than complying with a state or federal court order. And the authority would apply only to congressional districts, not state legislative lines, and it would expire in 2030. So what this does, Democrats argue that it is necessary to counter aggressive Republican gerrymanders elsewhere that can control Congress, while Republicans call it a blatant power grab that undermines Virginia voters' 2020 decision to create an independent redistricting commission. However, Delegate Rodney Willett, Democrat of Henrico, said this amendment creates essentially a narrow temporary exception. He also emphasized repeatedly that the proposal does not automatically withdraw any lines and does not eliminate the Virginia Redistricting Commission. Willett said, "We are not expanding the authority to change the state district lines. We're just talking about congressional lines, and more importantly, it does not change any of the lines as they exist today. This just creates the process to consider doing that." So there's going to be a special election timeline in April. Others are going to be in November. And what that's going to do, this will give Democrats approximately 10 Democratic-leaning districts if they redraw, leaving one Republican-friendly seat anchored in Southwest Virginia. So 10-1, 9-2. Terry Kilgore, Republican minority leader out of the House, he said, we're not that type of state. We're a 6-5 state. And some of those congressional seats are very competitive. But again, this is being done not because Virginia wants it, but clearly because the president is pushing an imbalance and Virginia wants to be part of correcting it. So as you can see, we're off to a running start, but more to come. As always, we want to thank you for joining us here on Stay the Water as we bring information to you so you can be more well informed. Listen, continue to tune in during this legislative season so you'll know what's happening in Richmond and how it affects you. Until next time, be good, be great, God bless, and we'll see you next week.
Hi, I'm Carrie Washington, and you're listening to State of the Water with award-winning host Dr. Eric Claville.